Many students enter Christy Trombetta's online math classroom truly believing that they're bad at math. But more than reflecting their actual ability, what Christy has found is that this self-labeling reflects a fixed mindset. By spending intentional time fostering growth mindsets among her students, Christy is able to help them understand that their mathematical abilities are not set in stone, but rather are skills that can be honed over time. Christy is an online teacher at Michigan Virtual, who has a particular knack for helping students develop growth mindsets in math. A teacher for over 20 years, when Christy transitioned into online learning, she was surprised to find that this environment actually helped her spend more one-on-one time with students. Relationship building is the cornerstone of Christy's online math classroom. She reminds us that there is no such thing as a student who is bad at math. Rather, when a student says something like this, she pays attention and works closely with them over the course of the semester to build their confidence. She takes this self-labeling as a signal that the student may need extra support to shift their inner dialogue from, "I'm bad at math," to, "I can actually do this." Throughout our conversation, Christy and I discussed her transition to online learning, her passion for making math attainable for all, and her hopes for the future of learning.
I think my whole philosophy on teaching changed too, though, from the beginning when I started out as a teacher. I think when I started out as a teacher, I really felt like I'm teaching math, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm really good at math, and I can teach these students math, and it's going to be great. And my philosophy now is that, yes, I'm teaching math. I love math. It's great. But really, I'm teaching students. And if I want them to learn the math, I have to get to know my students. And they have to get to know me a little bit too, because they're not going to be comfortable sharing information with me if they don't know me a little bit. So my approach now is much different. I get to know the students first, and then we work on the math.
I'm Nikki Herda, and this is Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms, a podcast where we celebrate our state's educators and explore the future of learning. Let's dive in. To kick off our interview, Christy and I started with rapid-fire questions, where I gave her prompts and then asked her to say the first thing that came to mind. We started off a little silly and then probed deeper with questions about the future of education. Favorite pizza topping?
Pepperoni.
Last show that you watched?
A Million Little Things.
I haven't heard that one.
It's good.
Coffee is?
Wonderful.
Last thing that made you smile?
My kids.
Favorite teacher?
Ooh, there are so many. I don't think I could pick one, honestly.
Great answer, honestly. Teachers are?
Awesome.
Michigan is?
Beautiful.
Innovation is?
Fun.
The person who most inspired your view on education?
I would say probably my first math department head in my first teaching job. Her name was Carrie Voorhees, and she was just an awesome teacher, and I really strived to be like her at that time.
The future of education is?
Bright.
Hey. Students need?
Compassion.
Teachers need?
Compassion.
I am hopeful that?
I am hopeful that this pandemic this is more than a one word, I'm sorry, but I'm hopeful that the pandemic has really bridged the gap between online and face-to-face learning, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Christy has been a teacher for nearly 20 years. Earlier in her career, she started off teaching face-to-face in the Metro Detroit area. Then, after taking a few years to raise her own children, she earned her master's degree in mathematics from Eastern Michigan University and has since been teaching students online. Early on, she was surprised to find that there were some advantages to teaching in the online environment that she hadn't been expecting. For example, because the course content had already been developed by instructional designers, she is able to spend more time focusing on intentional communication and relationship building with her students. This, she reports, has been most important in ensuring students succeed in her class, especially for those students who label themselves as bad at math. To get our conversation started, I asked her to tell me about her journey into online teaching and how the profession itself has changed since she first became a teacher. How would you say that teaching itself has changed since you first began your career in education?
Wow. Well, when I first began my career teaching, there wasn't a lot of technology, to be honest. I used an overhead projector every day, which I'm not sure they even exist anymore. But that was my go-to. And I had a computer, but honestly, I still used a paper grade book. I really didn't look up a lot of resources online. I wasn't looking for videos to show my students or even extra activities for them. That just wasn't really a thing then. Whereas now, that's kind of our go-to. Even for a classroom teacher, I feel like, they're using smart boards, they're using document cameras, they're using gamification and things like that in their classroom to engage their students. And so that's been kind of the major changes. There's so much more technology now available to us, and good technology, not technology that's just there, but things that we can really utilize to engage the student's experience, and that is really helpful to us as a teacher in planning exciting lessons and things to do with the students. So that's a major, to me, change in education. I think my whole philosophy on teaching changed too, though, from like the beginning when I started out as a teacher. I think when I started out as a teacher, I really felt like I'm teaching math, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm really good at math, and I can teach these students math, and it's going to be great. And my philosophy now is that, yes, I'm teaching math. I love math. It's great. But really, I'm teaching students. And if I want them to learn the math, I have to get to know my students. And they have to get to know me a little bit too, because they're not going to be comfortable sharing information with me if they don't know me a little bit. So my approach now is much different. I get to know the students first, and then we work on the math.
You spoke about how the introduction of technology itself into teaching has such a profound effect on the profession. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to why that is. I think it's easy for us to say, especially working at Michigan Virtual, as we both do, technology is important for teaching, but why? Like, what has it unlocked for us that wasn't possible before?
Well, I mean, like I said before, there's a lot of technology out there, but using technology in itself is not a great tool. We have to use it appropriately and in ways that are not only going to engage our students, but enrich their learning experience. And I think in the beginning, that wasn't really clear. I don't think we all knew that. As we started to become aware of the technology that was available, it was kind of just pushed on teachers. Use this. It's a new technology. It's great. But maybe the training wasn't provided, or maybe we just weren't there yet to really know how to best use these resources. And I think over the years, we've kind of honed in on that a little bit and figured out the ways that some of these resources can be utilized in the best way, what the best practices are for using technology. And so that has allowed us to kind of enrich the student experience in the online or a face-to-face classroom. But really, I think it's been more education for teachers on how to use these tools well. And it's a lot more collaboration between teachers saying, hey, this is what I tried in my classroom and it worked really well for my students. Maybe it could work for you too. And seeing that collaboration amongst teachers. And that's what I remember from working in a classroom, in a face-to-face classroom, was I got so much out of, during my prep hour, walking from classroom to classroom and kind of just peeking in and seeing what other teachers were doing. And then going back to those teachers later and saying, hey, can you tell me a little bit about what you were doing here? That looked really interesting. And I can remember learning a lot that way, and then taking those and trying new things in my classroom because of what I had seen there. And so to me, that collaboration amongst teachers and how they're using technology, I think has been really, really helpful.
So you're an online teacher now, but you started off in the face-to-face classroom. And I'm wondering if you could speak to it all. Like, were there any misconceptions that you had about online teaching? Was there anything that you found has surprised you that you weren't expecting out of being an online teacher that has happened? Any thoughts there?
Sure. So when I started teaching online, I honestly didn't have too much of an impression. I had taken one college class that was online, and I remembered it being a lot of busy work, very little communication with the instructor. And so I didn't have too big of an impression. I think the impression at that time was very much that online classes are just easy, busy work. You just do the work, you get the A, or you get the credit, that type of thing. And I don't think that is necessarily the impression anymore. The quality of online courses has increased dramatically from the time that I started teaching online to now. The improvement is amazing, and obviously there's a range of online programs out there, but what we're seeing now are online programs that are much more engaging. It's not just an online textbook that a student is reading and doing some problems. They're watching videos, they're communicating in discussions with their peers and with their instructor. And there's just a lot more to it than there used to be. It's certainly not an easy A in most cases. Even in the courses that I teach that would be considered an easier class. Okay, I think of my personal finance classes, and that's a typical like senior refresher math class. Most seniors take it because they need a fourth credit of math. And some of them maybe go into it thinking this is going to be an easy A. But there's a lot of work they have to do in that class because personal finance, we really want students to get the experience of all of the personal finance types of things they need to do, like writing a budget and what goes into deciding what kind of car to buy and financing a vehicle and what that looks like and getting a mortgage and all of those things. You can't do that just by reading a textbook. You have to really kind of do a little bit of research. And so the students in my classes there, they get to do a lot of that. We make it as hands-on as possible. And I think you just didn't see as much of that in the beginning of online teaching. Now, there's a lot more. And so it can make it really fun for the students and the teachers too, of course.
I'm curious, as compared to being a face-to-face teacher, have you found that, and I'm kind of asking because I've heard this from other online instructors as well, and I'm curious if it resonates with your experience, that in a way you have more time to connect one-on-one with students because the content of the course has already, been developed. Has that been true to your experience?
Definitely. I think when I was a face-to-face teacher, I spent a lot of time developing lessons. Um, we had basic lesson plans I would develop, but I'd get kind of bored with that. And so then I'd really want to create, fun, engaging lessons and activities for my students. And I spent a lot of time doing that. And while I talked to students too, and I did have those relationships with my students, I don't think I spent nearly as much time doing that as I did actually trying to figure out how I was going to teach the math. And so teaching online, having the curriculum already there and knowing that I can add my input to it. I can add extra resources for my students. I can make activities that I think will help to support their learning better. But really, I can focus a lot of my time on working with these students, meeting with them one-on-one when necessary, sending out communications to keep them on track. So yeah, like the relationship part of teaching online is really awesome. For the teacher that really tries to make that happen, it can just be such a great tool, and I think it can really be accomplished well in online teaching.
Yeah, that's just was so fascinating to me when I first started working here because, that's not what I thought. I guess didn't think much about it, but I didn't think that there's the capacity to have these kind of deeper relationships with students. Maybe not deeper, but at least more time for it. So that's pretty neat.
Yeah, there definitely is that time for those deeper relationships and connections with your students, and really it's so important for most of the students to have that connection in order to be successful in the class. They need it, just like they need the teacher in their in-person classes they need the online teacher, and the online teacher has to facilitate that communication in a much more intentional way to make sure that that it's a good experience for the student.
I also asked Christy about her favorite tech tool for teaching math. Here's one tool that she said has made the practice of teaching math online much easier.
I can talk about tech tools a little bit. I mean, I do use like a drawing tablet all the time to do a whiteboard with my students when we're working through problems in a Zoom meeting. So that's like my ultimate go-to. And to create screencast videos, I always have my drawing tablet, and we work through the problems that way. So that's probably like my big math tech tool.
Yeah. Is it like an art tablet, like the things that you use for art?
I mean, it's just this black tablet that has this cord here, and it has a pen, like a little pen like this, and it just plugs into my computer. It's literally plug and play, and I just can write directly on the tablet, and it'll show up right on my screen. I just pull up the Microsoft Whiteboard, and so that's what I use. So often I'll use Snagit and take a screenshot of a problem or a concept or whatever it is I'm working on the student with, and paste it onto my whiteboard, and then we'll work from there. Or I can screenshot like the assignment. So for my personal finance students, I'll screenshot the assignment a lot of the times because it's on a worksheet, and pull the questions up, and then we can work through the questions together with the worksheet up there, and we can write directly on it.
That's cool. So yeah, they can see you writing out whatever it may be, the equation or whatever it is. And I imagine that is actually easier than typing for math, right? Because of all the weird symbols and everything.
Yeah, it's much easier than I can. Honestly, with AP Calculus last year, I remember I didn't have this tool yet, and wanting to work through problems with students, and I would literally have like Microsoft Word open because there's a math editor in there, and I'd open all the symbols, and I'd try to like get the symbols right to show them, how to do an integral and the fractions and all, so that the notation was proper. But it was so time consuming to do that. It's much easier now to just be able to write.
During the second half of our conversation, we dug deeper into Christy's passion for making math attainable for all. She told me about what this means, why it's so important, and what it looks like in practice in her online math classroom. At the heart of this matter lies the concept of growth mindsets, which she explains are important to learning in general, but especially for math, where students too commonly enter her virtual classroom with many misconceptions about their own abilities. I want to zoom out a little bit and just ask about your vision for learning. So what is that vision, and what do you believe is most important?
I think my vision for learning is that all students, math students or otherwise, can really see the potential that they have. If I kind of hone in on math a little bit, I think a lot of students come in and they're not very confident, and they have this idea that they can't really be successful in a math class. They're just not very good at math. And my vision for these students is that I can help them get there, that I can help them realize the potential that they have, that with maybe more effort, or with learning something in a different way, with communicating with me a little bit more, or their other teachers a little bit more, they can get where they want to be. So I want them to get past that fixed mindset of thinking that this is all I'm capable of, to more of a growth mindset approach where they can know that their potential is boundless. They can go wherever they want to go. And if you can share that information with me, if the student can share that information with me, I can help you get there. And so my vision for students is that they really kind of recognize where they want to go, and that I am their partner as a teacher to help them get there.
And you kind of mentioned earlier about your passion for making math attainable for all. Is that tied into this?
Absolutely. Yeah, and part of what I meant by making math attainable for all, like I said, the student that comes in and that isn't confident in their math abilities, often that student comes to me and will say, I've never been good at math. My parents aren't good at math either, so they can't help me. I don't really know what to do. And so obviously I'm going to work with this student, and I'm going to help to build their confidence, and I'm going to show them they really can do this. But it's also talking with those parents, especially when we have so many students learning from home now. And the parents, they want to be able to help their kids. So I work with parents too to try to help them find the resources that are out there, to provide more resources to them so that they can feel confident in helping their child in this way. And so I don't want parents to feel like they can't help their kid because they didn't have a great math experience when they were a student. I want them to have that confidence to sit side by side with their kid and say, we're going to figure this out together. And we can send your math teacher a message if we need more help with this. But I really want students and parents alone to know that it is attainable, that they can do it. And if we work together, we'll get there.
Have you found, I'm just curious about this, that there's more of that in the math classroom, this idea of like I am or am not a math person? I remember I taught first year writing when I was in graduate school for a while, and I experienced that a lot. Students saying, "Oh, I am a good writer," or "Oh, I'm not a good writer." At a pretty young age, they've already decided this. And I'm wondering, why do you think that happens? And do you have any advice for other teachers about kind of combating this, like some strategies you've used to shift students from that fixed mindset to that growth mindset?
I think it is just a common belief that math is hard because maybe it takes more effort, maybe it takes more practice. I don't know where it stems from, to be honest, but it's definitely out there, and I think it is more common in math than a lot of other subjects, where people either say, I'm good at math or I'm not good at math. And I think it's more, the people who naturally will persist and keep working at something. The people that are more likely to do that are more likely to be successful in math. The people that aren't as likely to do that, it doesn't mean that they can't be good at math. It just means that they might need some extra supports to get there. And maybe for those students that feel that way, nobody's put those supports in place for them before. Nobody has kind of given them that push to show them how to get there. And so for me, when I encounter students that have this lack of confidence or math anxiety, as it's sometimes referred to, I try to find out exactly where they are. So every student that comes into my class is at a different point. Okay, some of them might be really amazing math students and they're just going to go through everything super quickly and easily, and they might not need me at all. And other students are going to stay right there on day one, as long as I will allow it, until I reach out to them and say, hey, I realized you haven't really gotten started in the course yet. Why don't we meet tomorrow and talk about what we can do to get you caught up and what I can do to help you understand this better. And for me, if I can get the student to meet with me and have a real discussion about why they haven't started yet, what's going on at home, how do you really feel about math, how was your math class last semester, and kind of have those conversations with them and see where they are mathematically, then I can better know where to start with them to get them where we need to be. And sometimes, for example, like in my geometry class, I might have a student who says, I barely passed algebra last year. How am I going to do geometry? And I can say, well, you know what? I understand that. I understand that algebra was a little difficult for you last year. So I promise to help you when we get to the basic algebra concepts again. And I'll review solving equations with you. And I'll review all these little things. And it's going to come back. And when we get to them, I don't want you to have anxiety about it. I want you just to send me a message and we're going to work through it together. And I promise you, the more we work on it, the easier it's going to get. And over time of doing this, and I've kind of earned the students' trust and their confidence is building, eventually there will be less messages and less meetings between us because they won't need it as much. They will realize that they can do it on their own. And it truly does happen that way. I worked with a student most of last year and she had so much anxiety and it was related to math, but it was also related to teaching, her being an online student for the first time and not really knowing how to approach that. And so we worked a lot on what it means to be a good online student, how to create a schedule that's going to work for you and help you stay on pace with your classes, how often you need to meet with me to make sure that you're understanding the material well, what to do when you don't pass a quiz and we need to refresh that material and make sure we understand it and can master this before we move on. All of those things that in a face-to-face classroom, you can just have those conversations with the student when you see them in class. In an online classroom, we have to be so much more intentional about making sure those conversations happen.
I'm told that you have a very student-centered math classroom, and I'm curious if you could just tell me a little bit about what that really means and what that looks like in practice.
Student-centered to me means really focusing on the student first and then the math. And so to me, I want to get to know my students a little bit first. I want to know where they're coming from. I don't mean geographically, but what their state of mind is, how they feel about being in my class, how they feel about math in general, how they feel about being online. Is this their first experience? Or do they take all their classes online and they're a pro? I want to know those things so that I can know where or when I might need to step in and intervene. And so that I can kind of create an idea in my head of where the student should be going, how they should be progressing, what it looks like. I take a lot of notes. I take a lot of notes on my students, and when I receive messages or communication from them, or if I'm sending a communication to them, I'm referring to my notes first because I want to make sure that the message I send to them, one, is personal and doesn't just look like a general message I'm sending to every one of my students. I will send them reminders that might be personal to them or the whole class. I do a lot of check-ins for students, maybe a student that's not doing well, but also for students that are doing great, because we don't know what's going on with that student that's doing great either. And they may not communicate with me unless I initiate that conversation and check in with them. So even the student that's doing great needs that communication with the instructor. I want them to have a great experience in my class. In order to do that, they have to know that I'm here. So I try to do things like we have a teacher feed in our classes, similar to what you'd see on a Facebook feed, and I can post things for my students and they can respond to it. And so I try to post a lot of things there about myself, about my family, silly things. I might use my Bitmoji, or I might, put silly math memes on there, or dad jokes about math, or, something as it relates to the class. But things for them to get to see a little bit of my personality so that they may then be more comfortable with me and more comfortable reaching out to me. And I also put a lot of other things in there to just try to help them with the class. But in order for me to expect them to give me some information about themselves, to share information about themselves, and to want to reach out to me, I feel like I have to give them some of that information about myself too, so that they see me as a real person that they can communicate with and that they want to communicate with, so that they can do well in the class.
There was one special story Christy told me that really illuminated how stifling a fixed mindset can be for students and how liberating it can be once they finally begin to shift toward that growth mindset. In this particular example, one of Christy's students was caught cheating on an assignment. Rather than punishing the student, however, she took a very different approach that was far more effective in the long run. I'm wondering if you can think off the top of your head of any examples of students who really benefited from, this approach that you've taken. So just reflecting on what you said earlier, you spoke about, how a lot of students feel like they're not math students. Any stories come to mind of students who had that mentality and were able to really make progress?
Yeah, I mean, to speak to kind of my intentionality and communication. So I had a student recently who I caught cheating in the class. She had submitted a couple assignments that were another student's, and I immediately noticed that this was not her work. And so I knew I had to reach out to this student and explain to her that obviously, submitting someone else's work as your own is never acceptable. But I also had to think about why she was doing this. What's the reason behind that? Because most students don't cheat just because it's easier. Most students cheat because they don't really think they're capable of doing it. They don't think they're capable of doing that work themselves. And the fear of getting a bad grade influences them into, making a poor choice instead of reaching out for some help. And so when I had this communication with the student, I felt like, okay, I need to get across to her that this isn't okay to do. But I also want to make sure I get across to her that I want her to be successful in my class. This isn't the end of the road because you cheated on a couple assignments. Like, we're not going to stop here. We're going to keep going. I know you can be successful in this class. You don't have to do this alone. Like, I will do this with you. We will work on this together. And so I know maybe you felt like you couldn't do this before, but we're going to start over. We're going to go back to square one, and we're going to work on this, and I promise you we'll get there. And so I sent this message to her, and I gave her some ways to, I reminded her how to communicate with me and what she could do to set up a meeting so we could start working on it. And it took about a week before she responded to me, and here I'm like every day waiting for a response from her. And of course, if we were in a classroom, I would have just seen her and I could have talked to her, but we weren't. And so she eventually responded a week later by scheduling a meeting with me, and I thought, okay, we're gonna meet, we're gonna talk about this. And I have met with this student almost every single day for the past several weeks because she is so determined now to learn this material, and she's working so hard. And she, our first couple of meetings, you could tell she was really not very confident. Her head was down most of the time. She didn't look me in the eye very much. And I just tried to maintain this positive, cheerful attitude. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to work with you, that type of thing. And she comes to our meetings now and she's smiling, and you can tell that she's happy to be there. The first thing she wants to do is to show me the work that she did the day before and to say, I want you to know that I went to that website you suggested. I did all these practice problems and I think I got them right. Can you look them over? And she's just, that level of confidence has raised so much over a couple weeks. Like, I know this is a student that is not going to need me at the end of the semester, that she's going to be okay going on to her next math class. And so I feel like because I was so intentional in my communication with her about working on this together, we will get there. I know you can do this, that it clicked. And she felt that. And the more that I've worked with her, I think she felt that more. And so it has really grown her confidence. And it's just been awesome to watch and see her grow in that way.
That is very powerful.
I think part of the other thing, maybe I didn't mention it there, but, when a student is caught doing something wrong, like cheating, they're usually embarrassed and they feel bad. I mean, when this has happened in the past, I usually will get a message back that says, I'm so sorry. And that makes me feel bad. I mean, I'm glad they're sorry. They recognize the mistake that they made, but it just makes me feel bad for them because that they just want some help and they want somebody that they can trust to get that help from. And so, I want the students to know that I'm not mad at you because you did that. Like, you made a mistake. We all make mistakes, and we're going to grow from those mistakes. And hopefully we're not going to make that same mistake again, and we'll be better for it.
Toward the end of our conversation, I asked Christy what hopes she has for the future. We also talked in greater depth about what this past year was like for her students, many of whom were learning online for the first time and struggled beneath a full schedule of 6 to 7 online courses. She reflected on why having this full of a course load can be so difficult for first-time online learners, but also acknowledged the critical life skills that can be developed from this sort of independent learning experience. She also offered some advice for fellow educators as we move forward into a new era of learning. As you look to the future of learning, how do you think the pandemic is going to transform how learning happens?
I think the pandemic is going to transform learning in that we're going to see more online learning opportunities for students, and not just more, but better, because there are so many more students taking online classes now. And not necessarily that these students are going to be taking all online classes, but because so many more students are and potentially will be taking online courses going forward, the caliber of all the online courses has to get better. It has to get better across the board. And so I think this pandemic is going to cause that to happen. And I think the collaboration between in-person teachers and online teachers is going to become stronger. I think you're going to see a lot more local schools developing online programs within their district so that they can more fluidly go between in-person and online learning when necessary. And so I think that will really increase opportunities for students. And those teachers that are teaching in the classroom or online, hopefully if they're working together and collaborating with their other teacher partners, that they will really increase the potential of that experience for their students.
Have you found, even in your online courses, that there are some students who never tried online learning before the pandemic and have found that they thrived? Because I know many students did struggle with it, especially full time. But have you found any of the kind of counter narrative to that?
I have had more students this year than ever before that are in my class as a first time online student, that they have no prior online experience, and all of a sudden they have been pushed into an entirely online schedule of 6 or 7 classes. And you feel for those students because it's a lot for a student to take one online class and figure that out and figure out their best strategies and practices for being successful there. And so for these students that, for whatever reason, no fault of their own, are now in a fully online schedule, they need a lot of support, at least in the beginning, to manage their time, to understand how to pace themselves, not only through the semester, but through their week and maybe through their day. Because they haven't had to do that before. When a student is in a traditional face-to-face, middle school or high school, they're going from class to class to class. Everything is paced out for them. The teacher is standing in front of them, kind of making sure that they're doing the assignments and learning the material. And when the student is online, specifically when they're online all day long, there are so many potential distractions. And aside from just not having to have those time management skills before, it can be really challenging for them. And so the one thing I realized this year is that, again, I had to be so much more about my intentionality in communicating with these students to make sure that they knew how to use the pacing guides I was providing and they knew how to schedule out their day. It's often, the first few weeks of a class, if I notice a student isn't making much progress, those are the students that I reach out to and say, hey, how's your day going? How's it going in all of your classes right now? Do you need some help in setting up a schedule to be able to reach your goals each week for these assignments? And so many of the students will respond and say, yes, I would love that. And they'll meet with me to do that. So I think we had more students than ever right now taking online classes. And while the content of the courses is still really important, we can't get to that content if they don't understand how to manage everything that's there, communication and time-wise.
When a student actually figures that out, like these time management skills and these kind of independent learning skills, do you think that kind of equips them better for life?
For sure. I think that's a huge life skill, right? I mean, we have to be able to manage our time well. And I think from a personal standpoint, when I went away to college and was kind of on my own for the first time, I did not manage my time well at all. And when you go from, having 6 or 7 classes every day at the exact same time to classes that are maybe twice a week and another one that's 3 times a week and one that's once a week, not only, is it just managing the schedule of getting to those classes, but determining when you're going to do all your extra work for those classes and making sure that it gets done. It was a big adjustment for me. And so for these students to get that experience now as a middle schooler or high schooler, I think it can only help them going forward.
That was my sense as well. I echo your sentiments entirely. I probably could have benefited from that as well. Do you have any advice or words of wisdom for your fellow educators out there right now?
My words of advice would just be to allow yourself some grace. This is a time kind of like we have never experienced before. And as teachers, I feel like we're trying something new a lot of the time right now. We're trying new ways to reach our students. We're trying to figure out how to go back and forth from in-person to online. We're trying to figure out the best way to reach our students. We're trying to figure out the best way to engage our students so that they want to be present in our classes and they want to do well in our classes. And when we're trying all these things, we're not always going to be successful at them. And that's okay. I think it's okay to try something and say, you know what, this didn't work very well. I sent this message to 200 students and I got one reply back. So I look at that and I say, okay, what can I do to make it better the next time? Or maybe I shouldn't have sent that at all. It's okay. We can reflect on it and we can move on and make a different decision going forward. So I say, allow yourself a little bit of grace. And in doing that, allow your students and their parents a little bit of grace too, because we just don't know what they're going through. We don't know everyone's situation at home. We don't know where they're coming from. And often whatever's going on at home is going to affect how they're able to succeed in our class or not. And so I very much operate on the principle of, just being kind and being caring and showing my students that I care and I'm here if you want to talk, and really just giving them the benefit of the doubt. Most of my students, I believe, want to do well. They want to be successful. And if I operate on that principle, I think they will see it and they will want to do well because of it.
After my conversation with Christy, I was left inspired by the care, patience, and intentionality that she possesses in challenging her students' beliefs that they're bad at math and helping them replace this fixed mindset with a growth mindset that's more conducive to their success. The power and promise of this methodology really shines in the example of the student who got caught cheating. Students who engage in this behavior often have something holding them back, Christy reminds us. They're often embarrassed and afraid that they won't be able to do it. However, with patience and care, it is possible to help students learn that they can improve. Christy is clear that she teaches students first and math second. Though it's easy to focus on the subject matter at hand, she's found through her years of teaching that if a student doesn't believe in themselves or doesn't have a trusting relationship with their teacher, they aren't nearly as likely to be successful, especially when learning online. That's why she focuses so much on intentional communication and relationship building in her online classroom. As we look to the future, we'll continue to celebrate Michigan educators, sharing their hopes, their fears, their dreams, and their beliefs in what's best for our children as we move forward into a new era of post-pandemic learning. Without a doubt, it's hard work to change a student's mindset from one that's fixed to one that's growth-oriented. But with leaders like Christy forging our path forward, if there's one thing we're certain of, it's that the future is bright. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Bright, Stories of Hope and Innovation in Michigan Classrooms. This podcast is produced by Herbie Gaylord, is hosted by me, Nikki Herda, and is made possible by Michigan Virtual, a nonprofit organization that's leading and collaborating to build learning environments for tomorrow. Education is changing faster than ever. Discover new models and resources to move learning forward at your school at michiganvirtual.org.